be a challenge. And having one day that just acknowledges that for fathers who are here, for those who are no longer with us, to celebrate and commemorate. And just looking at social media, it's lovely to see how people are sharing their memories of their fathers and their pictures of their babies, if they're new dads, or relatively new dads. So it's wonderful. And thanks again for inviting me along.
And as I said, today is also World Yoga Day and World Music Day. So as you were saying, it's a great time to be a
flexible father with a long playlist. Yes, I'm.
Truly. But Rob, really, I was watching Marriage Story some time ago, and it talks, one of the most poignant bits there really is from the lawyer played by Laura Dern, who talks about how the whole idea of fatherhood is such a recent phenomenon, just about, maybe 30 years old. And really the burden of parenting was really on the mother, and it's so unusual, which is what makes Marriage Story so sad and so memorable. And it's a pity it didn't win any Oscar, but that's another story. But it makes it so poignant because here is a man who genuinely wants to be a parent, who wants to be a father, and society doesn't necessarily recognize that as important as the mother. Is that something you faced as well, or your friends have faced?
Absolutely, Cabri. I think in the work I've done, especially looking back pre-industrial revolution, going back 200 or 300 years, when families were predominantly small holdings and farmers, dads played as big a part in caring, nurturing for children as mums did. They were very much part and parcel of the whole package of the family. The Industrial Revolution, the way society has changed, especially in the focus on the man being the breadwinner,
right,
and the man going out to work, completely shifted that dynamic. Parenting, bringing up children became a woman's job, and it wasn't a case that men were involved. Dads weren't very hands-on.
right.
In the last probably 30 years, as you point out from the film, that is shifting. It has shifted dramatically, mainly because of the rise of women in the workplace and the shift in the dynamics and the feminism-fueled movement to ensure that women attain the equality. Men have had to step up to the plate to a degree to take on the role that women have done for decades, centuries. Dads have also wanted to be more involved. Dads have realised their worth, and I think when you certainly look at when dads aren't involved, what the repercussions are of absent fathers, I think a lot of dads have started to realise the importance of them being there from the start. And I think that has helped to shift dynamic. That has helped to change the attitudes in the workplace towards men and flexible working and parental leave, certainly in Western Europe and the US. And I think it's not one particular thing. It's changing the empowerment of women in the workplace and the way that they've become, their careers have changed, and also the way that men have wanted to become more hands-on, wanted to be more active, probably led a little bit by the celebrity culture even. The fact that we look now at hands-on dads, the David Beckhams of this world, in a lot more admiration than we probably might have happened a generation or two ago. It would have been seen as being not necessarily the most masculine thing to be out with the kids and bringing up your children and carrying them in a papoose and being staying at home dad. That's changed. Society, attitudes are changing, and partly through the necessity of work and the family dynamics.
But as we were saying a little while ago, there is still largely a stereotype of the stay-at-home dad, and it's somewhat emasculating as well. We were talking about Motherland, which is a really lovely series, I think, that BBC runs, where the stay-at-home dad is a bit of a joke, It's only in the second season that he comes into his own. Do you still face a lot of, I wouldn't call it social stigma, but somewhat of social smearing, shall we say, where stay-at-home dads are concerned?
Absolutely. I think part and parcel of that is entrenched in masculinity. Whenever a group of men get together, they will talk about each other, and the first thing they'll ask is, what do you do for a living? Like, what is your job? How do you get there? What do you drive? What do you do for sport? the fact that your father would come 4 or 5 strokes down the list at least. Whereas I think when women get together, they'll speak, if they are mums, have you got any children, how many children have you got, would be one of the opening gambits almost.
Right.
So I think quite often that's just part and parcel of our culture, and masculinity in particular, is that we don't necessarily value fatherhood in the way that women do with motherhood. I found when I first became a stay-at-home dad, which was a long, well, 15 years ago now, so it was a while ago, there weren't that many of us. There was very few of us at the school gate doing the school run or the nursery run.
Right.
And part and parcel of that was me speaking to people at work who considered that I was taking a bit of an easy option. I think it was seen as kind of opting out of the 9 to 5. And yeah, it did feel like I was being seen as someone who had stepped to the other side, as it were.
Yeah.
I think the workplace is changing, certainly in light of recent events, especially working from home, more flexible, dad be more hands-on, etc. We'll shift that on again. But to begin with, the idea of stay-at-home dads was seen as a bit of a joke and parodied as being a bit of a hopeless guy who doesn't really know what he's doing.
Exactly. And not everybody looks sexy when they're pushing the pram, you know, and playing with their kids in the sort of the local neighborhood park. So that's a bit of a problem. But also wrapped in this whole thing is the idea of masculinity, isn't it? At the end of it, really, what is it to be a man in the contemporary world? You know, what the whole idea of toxic masculinity has come under so much of a backlash. But at the same time, you know, the other extreme is being a woke man. That's also something of a figure of fun. So really, what what does one end up doing? What does one end up being? You have to really renegotiate the idea of being a man, and then teach your son or your daughter what what being a man is.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the key things I try and get across in the books that I write, and as we spoke earlier, I take a lot of advice and insight from fathers and also experts in various fields, men and women. And the key thing that constantly comes back is role modelling.
Yeah.
We always remember our dads. We look up to our dads. The way we talk about our dads is always in a kind of from a viewpoint of looking up and admiring. So they obviously do lead, they influence from the start. And I think we've got to realise that as men, that every action, the way we speak to our wives and our partners, the way we interact with our choice of media,
Right.
Our children absorb stuff all the time, most of which we don't even realise they're taking on board. And I think very much the kickback against toxic masculinity must come from us, must come from men, obviously. And it is modelled. It is to ensure that our sons and daughters are aware of how to respect and treat each other. It's got to be shown to come from us. They hang on our every word, our children. And I think we've got to realise that, the impact that we have, and back up our words with actions as well. Being wary of the fact that we need to lead by example. It's difficult. Men have, for decades, for generations, led a very different path, and I think we're finding it difficult to find our role in life. Again, looking back on how women's careers and women's place in society has changed for the better. I think some guys are finding it difficult to work out where they should be at, and they kick against it. They react to it in a bad way, and our children will look at that and think, oh, Dad's angry, Dad's upset, Dad's working for Dad. So it is a case very much of looking in the mirror, looking at ourselves, and constantly being aware of the fact that our children are absorbing everything we do and everything we say.
And there, of course, remains an adversarial relationship between schools and parents. I mean, there's always the feeling that, the school feels that it can only teach so much. The child's environment at home is really where he gets his primary role modeling from. And then there's the peer group, and then there's the neighborhood. Where do you place the father in the scheme of all this? With all this that's happening in terms of just the behavioral issues that some kids seem to have. it becomes an issue at school somehow sometimes. How do you handle that?
Yeah, I see that a lot, and I've spoken and written about this several times.
Yes.
A good example of this is reading. Just
Yes.
fathers being seen to be reading at home
Yeah.
has such a very basic but very strong influence on their children, to be engaged in literature, to be taking enjoyment from books and magazines and newspapers. It's something the children will see, and they'll see that it's, as boys especially, will see that reading is a positive, a good thing, and
Right.
enjoy it, and dad's doing it. So that's one of the things when I've gone to parents' evenings meetings, especially, is that children who are doing well, children who are doing academically well, quite often just have books at home, have
Yeah.
dads at home who read
Right.
books or take them to the library to buy books. That's just one basic example of it, but it's one that comes up time and time again
Yeah.
uh, in some of the stuff I've written.
Rob, you've looked, your child is, of course, not just your child, but also in a way the subject of your work. He's what, now 16?
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
how has your relationship with him changed over the years?
It's much better than the relationship I had with my own father, and that for me is the, the ultimate success, to be honest with you, because I had a very distant relationship with my dad, due predominantly to the fact that he worked two jobs and he just wasn't home. And so the fact that I've been a stay-at-home dad from very early on has enabled me to engage with Stanley, my son, on a daily basis. So we have a good, strong, honest relationship. We clash. We're two men in the house. He's now, so he's two men in the house. So, but we work through things, which I really think that stems from having a strong relationship from a very early age. We know how to press each other's buttons, as it were, and I think that for me, as I say, is the greatest success to have come out of my relationships with my son is that we're open and we're honest, and we've been able to do that for a long time. And it's very fortunate that I have that. I appreciate that as well. Because a lot of dads and parents generally will find that before you know it, your kid's 16 and it feels like it's gone in the bat of an eye. I feel like I've had a good, strong, long relationship with my son. So that's been a key factor for me.
But do you feel that it's because you're a stay-at-home dad? If you had not been a stay-at-home dad, you wouldn't have had such a close relationship? Is
Not,
that a necessary condition?
no, not necessarily at all. I've been fortunate enough to talk to dads who are extremely busy working the top ends of various industries or just
Right.
work two jobs like my own dad, but made quality time, ensured the time at home wasn't sat in front of a screen necessarily, that they did engage with their daughters and sons and took them out and played as big a part as they possibly can. It's difficult to juggling acts, as we all know these days, but I was especially fortunate, and as a stay-at-home dad, I was more hands-on than some fathers have been, but that doesn't in any way kind of divide the quality of dads who haven't had the same amount of time, but what time they have had, they've made it count, they've made a positive impact. So I think if there is anything to take from that, maybe as a society we really do need to provide more opportunity for both parents to share the
Yeah.
parenting love. Going back to what I was saying earlier about things like shared parental leave, paternity leave, flexible working, putting the family first. Part of that is hampered by the stigma about men leaving the office too early.
Yeah.
I found myself one night writing an article in the office about the joys of fatherhood. It was 8 o'clock at night. I should have been at home giving Stanley a bath, but I wasn't. I was still in. That was when I realised that I needed to change.
Right.
I would have the impact I wanted to have.
Right. But, when you talk about the family and the whole idea of redefining of how the family functions, we also need to look at the family as a unit. You can't possibly have the same kind of division of labor that we had, say, 50 years ago or even 40 years ago. So the family itself as a unit has to be much more dynamic. The idea of the primary caregiver could change even within 5 years, 10 years, even within the same family. And that's something that we still have to come to terms with, isn't it? Because it's a very flexible situation. I mean, tomorrow you could be a stay-at-home dad. 5 years later, it could be your wife, depending on the salaries, depending on a whole host of things. What do you feel about the idea of the family as a unit being seen in a much more a flexible way by society, by the workplace, by popular culture at large? That's very important. Popular culture plays a huge role, doesn't it?
Absolutely. We don't really see television programs that feature home dads that often, or
Exactly. Yeah. Except, as we said, usually as a joke.
joke. Yeah. So certainly that's a prime example where a shift in the representation, the way that fathers are presented, would help. I think generally, I generalise. In fact, I can only speak from someone based in the UK, but the focus is very much on mums and mothers from before babies are born,
Right.
in health services, in terms of antenatal care,
Yeah.
postnatal.
Postpartum depression, you know.
Exactly, and rightly so. But
Yeah.
I think dads are already playing catch up
Yeah.
for their child born. So the shift in the workplace, the shift, sorry, in the family home, needs to start almost from the moment that baby is born. In
Yeah.
the fact that dads need to be shown how to engage, shown how to nurture their child, be
Right.
as hands-on as mum, and to be as bold and ready to step up to the plate at whatever time. So to suddenly become a stay-at-home dad and you've not really had any engagement in your child, and they're 6 years old, and you've got to pack 30 things to get them to school to make sure they're at school on time, and then you realise, oh, you've forgotten the child or whatever. It's a joke on TV, but
Yeah.
to an extent, you suddenly find yourself going from working 9 to 5 in the office for 5 years, and then you've got a child that you've spent playtime with, quality time and bath time, but you don't know how to look after them on a day-to-day basis. If that changed from the start, if there was a greater focus on father's involvement and engagement, as well as dad stepping up to the plate, of course, then I think that shift in dynamic in home, whenever that would happen, would be a lot smoother and a lot more beneficial for everyone.
But do you see that change happening around you? Do you see, people being more empathetic about, the roles that that the mother and father have to play?
I've seen it happen here in the time that I've been writing about fatherhood, so in the last 15 years. Certainly the shift towards postnatal fatherhood groups,
Right.
mentor groups for new dads, the change in attitude towards places like baby changing facilities which dads can use as well as mums.
Exactly, because they're usually in the ladies' loo. What do you do?
Yeah, there's been times when I've managed to ask someone to guard the door, and I've got in to change my
Yeah.
son's because it was a ladies' toilet. I had to do it in. Those kind of things are changing to an extent. It's slow, and I don't know that it's necessarily happening all over. It certainly is happening in parts of the UK. But I think that's probably a good example of how it would take a societal effort, the recognition that dads can play as vital a role in the day-to-day life of their children as mums, to dads to be leading that as well helps. As I say, I've noticed there are some good dads groups now online, especially where good practice, best practice, ideas, or just cries for help among dads are shared. That wouldn't have happened 15 years ago. The internet's helped in that respect, but also I think dads realising that empathy is helpful, shared knowledge is helpful.
Right.
Yeah, so things are changing, but it's a long haul.
We talk about the working mom's guilt, I mean, so much has been written about that, and I think you can just go on and on. There are blogs, there are movies, there are books. What about the working father's guilt? Is there such a thing?
Absolutely, as I say, I fell victim to it quite early on, and it's difficult because obviously part of our makeup is to provide. I
Yeah.
think it's a generalisation again about masculinity, but we think that our role is very much to be the breadwinner,
Right.
and that way we're supporting the family as best we can, and that is still the case. But it's an element of guilt. I think definitely. Again, it's a two-pronged approach. Society needs to change the workplace, and dads themselves need to change. They need to the fact that going to the office. It's not humiliating to say I'm a father first. It's not humiliating to say, you know what, I'm leaving early today because I'm taking my daughter to her swimming class or whatever. I think changing the priorities, changing the focus, putting fatherhood, putting parenting, putting children first, it is something we need to do as dads, but we need the workplace to help us.
Rob, of course, you've also read the French view on motherhood and parenting, which is essentially you just let them be, and they somehow reach adulthood, and everything is fine. You don't have to necessarily nurture them, and sort of spoil them almost at every step of the way. That's a very French way, in a generalization, of course, again. But that is quite opposite to the way motherhood has been sort of exalted in the US, or maybe even in the UK. How does that continental view, in a way, of motherhood, how does that work for you?
It's interesting because I've spoken to people in the UK, and when my son was at nursery school, we had two children there from France in his class. Their parenting approach was very different. I'd noticed it almost immediately. So I find it one of them ones where when I'm exposed to it, I can see the benefits of it. I can understand the benefits. But in theory, it goes against everything I think that should be doing. I think that should try and be involved as much as possible in their child's life. In a hands-on, productive, positive way. But to an extent, I agree. I mean, an element of freedom is something that I think we probably miss. I think my generation were one of the last, when I was a child, to kind of be given more of a free rein. We're very health and safety conscious now, and I think that would jar with a lot of parents, especially the fact that we could maybe ease off and let the kids find their own way. I'd certainly know among the parents I know now, they'd find that quite a strange approach. But it's interesting, and it's not a generalisation. It's one of the ones where I can't think. When I think about all the French parents I know, and there are a few now through the book, they have a very different approach.
Yes,
it seems to work. So,
yes, it seems to work marvelously. They just they treat them almost like adults, and soon they are adults, and great.
Yeah. That's their way of nurturing them for the life ahead.
Yeah. The other point that I wanted to talk to you about is this whole idea of, even when you have a more equitable relationship with the spouse, you still have a certain division of labor. So how does it work? And is it, is it, how does it work, especially for the kids? Do they sometimes think that you're an oddball household, or are they more accepting of you?
It's interesting because I find that I constantly refer back to my own experiences, and one of the first things my wife, my son's mum, did was to teach me to cook. I'd never seen it being done by my dad. I wasn't aware that men really cooked. I mean, I knew that there were chefs and that men can cook, but I'd never really done it. And that division of labour was changed fairly rapidly in our relationship. She got me up to speed with cooking.
Good.
Providing for her, and eventually cooking the family unit. I think each family's situation is obviously going to be unique to them. I think being seen to be dividing the labour, going back to what I was saying earlier about modelling good behaviour. So it's not just being the dad who reads in the home, but it's being the dad who cleans up and helps out and tidies up and does the cooking and does the washing and knows how these things work. So you immediately dispel stereotypes. You try and prevent your child thinking that's a man's job, that's a woman's job. So it's it's going back to that modelling good behaviour thing.
Yes.
But I learned the hard way, and I'm quite glad I did. Quite enjoy cooking now, but that was one example of my experience.
Great. So, what about children? The idea that they never grow up, in the sense that a child, even if he's 50, will still be your child. And we are coming back to the whole idea of children not really wanting to leave. They want to be with you even. I mean, earlier there was, children we presume that they would leave at 18 and then we would not see them except at Christmas or other festivals. But now they don't seem to want to leave, which is, of course, a function of so much that's changing around in the economy and society. But what do you have to say to that?
Yes, for the book I've just written, I spoke to dads who their children have come back into the fold. So some of them went off to university, went off to work, their relationships changed, or the economy, the impacts of job loss, etc. I mean, the children have come back home in their 20s and 30s, so
Right.
or in one or two cases not actually moved out yet at all. And in all those, we were talking about how the rules change, the boundaries change. Suddenly you've gone from having a child in the house to, okay, they're your child, but they're an adult, they're grown up. And that's really interesting, how you manage that situation, how you ensure that they're able to have a full adult life with friends and relatives and relationships going on under the same roof as their parents. It's a shift. It's a cause of conflict. Certainly, in a couple of the fathers I spoke to, they struggled with their sons coming back. In one case, coming back with his wife as well, and living.
Of course.
Again, it's unique to each individual family, but it's something we're seeing more and more of. I'd be interested to see how 10, 15 years from now, how these relationships might change that general approach to older children living at home. Whether we see it in the interaction between grandparents and grandchildren. It might be that the longer you've stayed at home with your parents, they may not want to be as hands-on as grandparents, as if there was that divide, if there's a natural gap that you didn't see each other 5 days of holidays. So it's been an interesting one. It's something I've only recently become aware of, and I think economic situations have caused that. Certainly in the UK, young adults can't afford to leave home. They can't afford to stay at home. And so that's making for some interesting family dynamics. If you say the child never grows up, I find fatherhood is a job for life as well. You never finished it completely, but your 5-year-old might be crying, or your 45-year-old might be crying, and you need to be there or put a hand on the shoulder or whatever it takes to help out. I don't think that ever changes.
Welcome to our club. Mothers have known this for a long time. It's just that fathers are discovering this now. So really,
not mum's book. I was constantly taking a leaf out of a woman's book, as it were. Definitely, yeah.
Right. So, Rob, if I were to ask you your top tips to sort of negotiating modern fatherhood, 3 of them, 4 of them, whatever. Since we do love listicles, what would that be?
Certainly, the reprioritisation, I think, is something that's key. As men need to think about their role, think about list of what they are, and not necessarily to put that career as number one on the list.
Right.
I used to say, I'm a journalist, I'm a writer, oh yeah, I'm a father. I'm a father first now, and it took a little while for me to realise the importance of putting that at the top of the list. That would help dads certainly to say, okay, I'm a man, I'm a dad. That's the first thing I am more than anything else. It's a job for life, and it's the most important one you have. As regards to dealing with modern situations, I can't emphasise enough the bond of dads coming together via online, via forums, just chatting in situations where for a long time it was very strange to be in a school playground with 2 or 3 other dads. We'd always be slightly wary of our situations or not quite know why the other one was there. When you do get together, you actually find it's quite useful. You actually find you do share a bit of best practice, and you pick up the odd tip of that. So it's something that women have done, as we were saying, taking a leaf out of the mum's book, something that women have done for years, that ability to get together and just to share ideas or suggestions or just tell me to cry on, bounce ideas off, etc. Men who do that, and it is happening more. I do see that with some dad groups online and new father groups. If you've got a guy, you've got a friend who's in a similar situation to you, stay in touch. Drop him a text, drop each other a text, how you doing, kind of thing. Just do something that guys struggle to do, but with the purpose being built around your fatherhood, built around your child. It does help to talk, and it helps to share good ideas, and it gives you a sense of identity as a dad. There isn't a manual. As much as I'd like to think the books I write are manuals for dads, there isn't a set manual. Okay, we learn as we go.
Right. Yeah.
It gives you a better idea of what being a father involves when you talk to other fathers and get an idea of what they do, and they get an idea of what you do. So that's something I do. Modelling best practice, going for a walk with your son and daughter, going for a ride with your son and daughter on a bike, showing them what it means to eat healthily or be fit and active. That's something that I find is probably more influential than we realise as regards bad eating habits, bad dietary habits, as much as it was when I was saying earlier about how you speak to other people, how the interaction you have with your wife, and that your child will look at that and absorb it and think about how men and women interact, and that will have an impact on them. Equally, modelling good behaviour in the fact that you're fit and active and you're looking after yourself and you're in good health. I think they'll absorb that as well. So try and be an active dad, be a dad who chats a lot, and be a dad who enjoys the role more than anything, because it is a job for life.
Right. Great. Thank you so much, Rob. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you, and I wish you all the best. And no working fathers guilt for you.
Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you. See you. Bye.
Bye now. Bye.